Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. Death was winning the race, and Ethan Caldwell knew it. Lightning split the night sky like divine fury as his BMW struggled through the apocalyptic downpour, windshield wipers battling uselessly against sheets of rain that turned the world into liquid chaos. 32 years of commanding boardrooms and bending million-dollar deals to his will meant nothing now. Tonight, he was just a desperate son, racing to reach his dying father's bedside and losing. "Hold on, Dad. Please just hold on," he whispered through gritted teeth, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The call had shattered his perfect evening 28 minutes ago. His father, the unbreakable Charles Caldwell, who'd built a business empire from dirt and determination, who'd never shown weakness or shed a tear in front of his son, was taking his final breaths in City Central Hospital. 40 miles through hell. Massive heart attack. The doctors had been blunt. 1 hour, maybe less. Every minute Ethan spent fighting this storm was a minute stolen from goodbye, from forgiveness, from the words that had been building between them for years. His hands trembled as rain hammered his windshield with divine judgment. He'd spent a lifetime building walls between them, choosing profits over presents, deals over dinners with the old man. Now those walls were crumbling like sandcastles, and all he had left were regrets racing through his mind like accusations. The speedometer climbed past 90 on the flooded highway, reckless, suicidal. He didn't care. His phone lit up again, another call from the hospital. Ethan's heart sized. Was it over? Had he lost his last chance to tell his father he loved him, to beg forgiveness for choosing money over the man who'd given him everything? He reached for the phone with shaking fingers, his eyes leaving the road for one fatal heartbeat. The deer materialized in his headlights like a ghost. Time shattered into fragments. The world became spinning metal, exploding glass, and the sickening symphony of his BMW, careening off the highway and tumbling down the rain-soaked embankment. Ethan's last coherent thought before darkness swallowed him was his father's disappointed face, and how he'd failed him one final, unforgivable time. 23 minutes later, Nora Jenkins fought her way through the storm, each step a battle against wind that seemed determined to drive her to her knees. Her threadbare jacket offered no protection against the deluge, and her worn sneakers squelched through puddles that had become treacherous streams. She'd been working late at the medical center, completing her final nursing certification requirements, when the last bus broke down. Now she had to walk the 5 miles home through this hellish storm. "Lord, I know you don't give us more than we can handle," she murmured to the storm, rain streaming down her face like tears. "But I'm running mighty low on strength here." At 26, Nora had buried more dreams than most people dared to have. College was a fantasy she'd abandoned when her mother died, leaving her to care for her ailing grandmother. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford when every dollar went to medicine and rent. But despite the poverty, the loneliness, the constant struggle, her heart remained unbroken. Her faith burned steady as a lighthouse in the storm. The flash of twisted metal caught her eye as lightning illuminated the roadside carnage. Down the muddy embankment, a luxury car lay crumpled against an ancient oak tree, steam rising from its destroyed engine like the breath of something dying. Someone was trapped inside. Without hesitation, Nora scrambled down the treacherous slope, falling twice and scraping her knees raw. The storm had turned the hillside into a mudslide. But she clawed her way toward the wreckage. Her nursing training from the community college and current certification program flooding back to memory. "Hello, can you hear me?" she called out, pressing her face against the spiderweb driver's window. Inside, a man lay unconscious, blood streaming from a vicious gash across his forehead. He was devastatingly handsome, strong jawline, olive skin, thick dark hair now matted crimson with blood. But what struck her beyond his beauty was the peaceful expression on his face, almost angelic. Despite the violence that had brought him here, the car groaned ominously, and Nora realized the massive oak was the only thing preventing it from rolling further into the ravine. She had to get him out now. The driver's door was crushed beyond hope, but the passenger side had popped open from impact. Nora crawled inside, her heart hammering as she assessed his condition. Blood was pooling beneath him, internal bleeding, possibly punctured organs. She'd seen enough trauma in her medical training to recognize death's approaching footsteps. "Listen to me, handsome," she whispered fiercely, gently cradling his face. "You are not dying on my watch tonight. You hear me? Not while I have breath in my body." Working with desperate efficiency, She tore strips from her white blouse, the good ones she'd worn to her certification examined, pressed them against his wounds. The bleeding was worse than she'd feared. She needed to apply pressure. But moving him could prove fatal. "Please, God, guide my hands," she prayed aloud, then began working with the gentle strength that had carried her through every crisis life had thrown at her. As she worked, his eyelids fluttered open, revealing the most stunning eyes she'd ever seen, deep ocean blue, like storm clouds over water, filled with pain but somehow still radiating warmth. When their gazes locked, something electric sparked between them, a connection so profound it stole her breath. "Am I dead?" he whispered, his voice rough with agony but surprisingly gentle. "Not if I have anything to say about it," Nora replied, startled by the tenderness in her own voice. "What's your name?" "Ethan," he managed, struggling to focus on her face through the pain. "Ethan Caldwell. I was trying to reach my father." "Shh. Don't waste energy talking. Save your strength." She continued applying pressure to his wounds, monitoring his breathing for signs of shock. "I'm Nora Jenkins, and I'm going to take very good care of you." Ethan's eyes fixed on hers with startling intensity. Even through his pain, she could see something stirring in those blue depths: surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that neither of them had words for yet. "You're beautiful," he whispered, reaching up to touch her cheek with blood-stained fingers, like an angel sent from heaven. Nora felt tears mixing with rain on her face. "I'm no angel, sugar, just someone who happened to be walking by when you needed help." "No," Ethan said with surprising strength, his gaze never wavering from hers. "You were sent. I can feel it in my soul." Sirens wailed through the storm in the distance. Nora had called 911 on her ancient flip phone the moment she'd found him, but help was still precious minutes away. She could see Ethan fading, his beautiful eyes growing heavy with approaching unconsciousness. "Stay with me," she pleaded, taking his hand in both of hers. "Please stay with me. Fight for your life." "What if I don't make it?" he asked, fear creeping into his voice for the first time. "Then I'll be right here beside you until the very end," Nora promised with fierce conviction, squeezing his hand tight. "You won't be alone. I swear it on my grandmother's soul." The ambulance arrived in chaos, flashing lights cutting through darkness, paramedics shouting orders as they worked to extract Ethan from the twisted wreckage. As they stabilized him and loaded him onto a stretcher, Nora found herself pushed back, her life-saving work complete. "Wait," Ethan called out weakly as they lifted him toward the ambulance. "The woman who saved me. Where is she?" But when the paramedics looked around, Nora had vanished back into the storm like a guardian spirit, leaving behind only Ethan's memory of her face and her grandmother's precious gold locket, broken from her neck during the rescue and lying forgotten in the mud and twisted metal. As the ambulance raced toward City Central, Ethan clutched the delicate locket in his palm, the only proof that his angel had been real. He'd never experienced anything like the soul-deep connection he'd shared with this stranger who'd risked everything to save him. Even through his pain and fear, one thought burned bright and clear. He would find her again, no matter what it took. Death had been winning the race tonight, but Nora Jenkins had changed the rules entirely. Now Ethan had a reason to live, a reason to fight, a reason to become the man worthy of the angel who'd crawled into hell to pull him back to life. The storm was passing, but the real tempest, the one that would transform both their lives forever, was just beginning. Chapter 2. Haunted Hearts. Ethan Caldwell awakened to the sterile white ceiling of City Central Hospital, and the first sensation wasn't physical pain. It was the crushing weight of loss settling on his chest like a tombstone carved from regret. 3 days had passed since the accident. 3 days of drifting between consciousness and darkness, while his broken body fought to heal, but his soul felt shattered beyond any surgeon's skill to repair. His father was dead. The words echoed in his mind like a death knell. He'd missed saying goodbye by exactly 17 minutes, that would haunt every remaining day of his life. While he'd lain unconscious in twisted metal, Charles Caldwell had taken his final breath, calling out for the son who never came. "The last thing your father said was your name," the night nurse had told him yesterday. Not realizing those words would become Ethan's personal hell. He kept asking for you, kept saying he had to wait for Eddie to come home. Now, staring at the acoustic tiles above his hospital bed, with his ribs wrapped tight and his left arm imprisoned in a cast, Ethan felt like he was drowning in an ocean of might-have-beens. The business empire his father had built, the billions in assets, the respect and fear their family name commanded, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was that he'd spent years choosing profit margins over presence, and now it was eternally too late for redemption. The only thing keeping him from completely surrendering to despair was the memory of his angel, his salvation, the woman with gentle hands and fierce determination who'd crawled into a death trap to save his worthless life. Nora Jenkins. Even her name was poetry, rolling off his tongue like a prayer whispered in cathedral silence. He'd spoken it so many times. The nurses thought he was suffering from brain trauma. Ethan reached into his nightstand drawer and retrieved the delicate gold locket, running his thumb over its intricate engravings. It was clearly an antique, worn smooth by decades of being treasured. Inside was a faded photograph of an elderly black woman with kind eyes, and the same gentle smile he remembered from that storm last night, their grandmother. Without doubt, "Where are you, Nora?" he whispered to the empty room that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. "I need to find you. I need to thank you for giving me a reason to live." But it was more than gratitude driving his obsession. In those moments when their eyes had met in the wreckage, something profound had occurred, a recognition deeper than attraction, stronger than desire. It was as if his soul had finally found its missing piece, scattered across the chaos of twisted metal and falling rain. "Doctor." Patel entered the room with his usual concerned expression, chart in hand. "How are we feeling today, Ethan?" "Like I've lost everything that ever mattered," Ethan replied with brutal honesty, his voice rough from disuse. "Your injuries are healing remarkably well. The broken ribs will take another few weeks. But you're young and strong. Physically, you'll make a complete recovery. And emotionally?" Ethan clutched the locket tighter. "My father's dead because I couldn't reach him in time. The woman who saved my life has vanished like she never existed. How do you recover from that kind of devastation?" "Doctor." Patel settled into the visitor's chair, his professional demeanor softening. "Grief isn't a wound you heal, Ethan. It's a burden you learn to carry, but you can choose how you honor your father's memory moving forward." "I want to find her," Ethan said with sudden, fierce determination. "The woman who saved me. I have to find her and thank her properly. The police couldn't locate her. She didn't leave any contact information with the paramedics or emergency responders. Then I'll hire investigators. I'll search every hospital, every clinic, every nursing program in the entire state if necessary." Ethan's voice grew stronger with each word. "She's out there somewhere, and I'm going to find her if it takes the rest of my life." 8 miles away, in a cramped studio apartment above Lee's laundromat, Nora Jenkins was waging her own war against grief and crushing guilt. Her grandmother, the woman who'd raised her with nothing but unconditional love and endless sacrifice, had passed away 1 week after the storm, her weak heart finally giving out after months of declining health. The timing felt cruel, losing her grandmother so soon after that life-changing night in the storm. "I'm so sorry, Grandmama," she whispered to the oppressive silence, clutching the faded photograph that was all she had left of the locket her grandmother had given her on her 16th birthday. "I lost your necklace, the one your own mother gave you, the one you wore every single day. I failed you when you needed me most." The funeral had been yesterday, a simple graveside service attended by a handful of elderly neighbors and Pastor Thompson from their tiny Baptist church. Nora had worn her only black dress, the one with the carefully hidden hole near the shoulder that she'd tried to conceal with strategic safety pins. She'd stood alone beside the cheap casket, watching them lower the woman who'd been her mother, father, and best friend into the unforgiving ground. Now she sat in the suffocating silence of an apartment that felt cavernous without her grandmother's warm presence. The medical bills had devoured everything, their meager savings, the little jewelry her grandmother had treasured, even the small television that had been their only entertainment. All that remained were memories and the crushing weight of solitude. But through her grief, one memory kept surfacing like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. The man in the wreckage, Ethan, with his ocean blue eyes and the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious instead of someone worthless. In those terrifying moments when she'd thought he might die in her arms, she'd felt a connection so powerful it had taken her breath away. "You were sent," he'd said with such conviction, and despite everything, Nora found herself believing it. Maybe she had been sent not just to save his life, but to discover that she was capable of being someone's salvation, that even someone like her, with nothing to offer but determination and love, could make a difference in this cruel world. The knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Nora wiped her eyes and opened it to find Mrs. Lee from downstairs, holding a steaming plate covered with aluminum foil. "Chicken and rice," the elderly woman said in her careful English, her weathered face kind with concern. "You too skinny. Need eat more." "Thank you, Mrs. Lee," Nora managed, accepting the warm plate. "That's incredibly kind of you. You good girl. Take care of grandmother like Angel." Now you take care of yourself, okay? No more crying alone." As Mrs. Lee shuffled back downstairs, Nora felt fresh tears threatening. Kindness from near strangers seemed to completely undo her these days. She found herself thinking about Ethan again. Had he survived his injuries? Had he made it to his father's bedside in time? The not knowing was eating at her soul like acid. She'd considered going to the hospital to check on him, but what would she say? How could she prove she was the woman who'd saved him? She had no identification, no way to verify herself, and besides, what business did a poor girl like her have visiting a man who'd clearly been wealthy, judging by his expensive car and designer clothes? Their worlds existed in different universes. The storm had brought them together for one miraculous moment, but dawn had revealed the harsh truth. She was nobody special, just a woman who'd happened to be walking by when fate intervened. But late at night, when sleep eluded her and the apartment felt like a tomb, Nora found herself touching her bare neck where the locket should have rested, and remembering the way Ethan had whispered her name, like it was something sacred, like she was someone worth knowing, worth remembering, worth finding again. "Nora Jenkins," she whispered to herself, trying to hear it the way he had. For just that moment in the storm, she'd felt like she could be somebody's angel instead of somebody's burden. Meanwhile, across the city, in his penthouse apartment overlooking the glittering skyline, Ethan stood at floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the lights twinkle below like earthbound stars. He'd been released from the hospital that morning, but his luxurious home felt like a mausoleum filled with the ghost of his father's expectations. Every surface held reminders of Charles Caldwell. The antique chess set they'd played on when Ethan was young, framed photographs from business trips they'd taken together, contracts they'd signed side by side. Building their empire, the silence was deafening. His phone had been ringing constantly, business associates offering hollow condolences, lawyers requiring signatures for the inheritance, reporters wanting statements about the future of Caldwell Industries. Ethan had ignored them all. Let the corporate vultures circle. He had infinitely more important matters demanding his attention. "Mr. Carter," he said into his phone, calling the most expensive private investigator money could buy, "I need you to find someone for me. A woman named Nora Jenkins. She saved my life 3 nights ago, and I need to thank her properly. Can you provide any additional details? Physical description. Approximate age. Last known address?" Ethan closed his eyes, bringing her face into perfect focus in his memory. Mid-20s, African-American, about 5'6", breathtakingly beautiful. She was walking through the storm near Highway 287 around midnight. She has medical training, knew exactly what to do when she found me bleeding out. "That's not much information to work with, Mr. Caldwell. Then you'd better start working harder," Ethan said with quiet intensity. "I don't care what it costs or how long it takes. Find her, Carter. Find my angel." As he ended the call, Ethan touched the locket again, feeling its warmth against his palm. Somewhere in this vast city, his salvation was grieving too. He could sense it in his bones, feel it in the connection that transcended physical distance. The bond they'd shared went beyond the accident. It was so deep and absolutely unbreakable. "I'm going to find you, Nora." He promised the night sky that sparkled with possibilities, "And when I do, I'm going to spend whatever time I have left proving that some things matter more than money. Some people are worth everything." Neither of them found sleep that night, both lying staring at different sections of the same star-filled sky, both carrying pieces of each other's hearts without fully understanding the magnitude of what had begun. The storm had ended, but the real tempest, the one that would reshape both their lives in ways they couldn't imagine, was just beginning to gather strength. Chapter 3. Ultimate Sacrifice. 2 weeks after laying her grandmother to rest, Nora thought she'd experienced the deepest heartbreak possible. She was devastatingly wrong. The call shattered her restless sleep at 2:47 a.m., jolting her from dreams filled with storm-blue eyes and gentle voices. Tasha's name flashed on her cracked phone screen, and Nora's heart lifted for the first time since the funeral. Her best friend always seemed to know exactly when she needed to hear a familiar voice. "Girl, thank the Lord you're calling," Nora whispered, sitting up in her narrow bed. "I've been drowning over here. And, is this Nora Jenkins?" The voice was male, official, and heavy, with the careful sympathy that always preceded life-destroying news. Nora's blood turned to ice water in her veins. "Yes. Who is this? Where's Tasha?" "This is Sergeant Lopez with Metro Police, ma'am. I'm deeply sorry to inform you that Tasha Freeman was killed in a motor vehicle collision tonight." She was struck by a drunk driver on Martin Luther King Boulevard at approximately 1:15 a.m. The words hit Nora like physical blows, each syllable shattering another piece of her already fractured heart. "No," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "No, that can't be right. She was supposed to visit me tomorrow. We had plans. Ma'am, I understand this is devastating news. Miss Freeman had your contact listed as her emergency contact. There's something else we need to discuss urgently. She had 3 children with her triplets, 15 months old. They survived the crash, thanks to their car seats, and are currently at City Central Hospital. Child Services needs to know if there's family who can take custody." The world tilted sideways beneath Nora. Tasha's babies, Joy, Grace, and Caleb, 3 perfect, innocent angels, who were now orphans because some drunk bastard couldn't be bothered to call a taxi. At 15 months, they were just beginning to walk and talk, just starting to become little people with personalities. "Their father?" she asked, though she already knew the painful answer. No father listed on any birth certificates. Miss Freeman was a single mother with no known relatives. "Are you aware of anyone who might be able to care for the children?" "I'll be right there," Nora interrupted, her voice growing stronger despite the tears streaming down her face. "Don't let anyone else take them. I'm coming now." She threw on clothes and ran through empty streets, her heart pounding with equal measures of grief and desperate purpose. Tasha had been infinitely more than her best friend. She'd been her sister in every way that mattered, her confidant, the one person who'd never judged her for being poor or uneducated or struggling. They'd grown up together in the foster system, 2 throwaway kids who'd found family in each other when the world offered nothing but disappointment. And Tasha's babies, Nora, had been present at their births, had held each tiny perfect body in her arms, and sworn to love them forever. Joy, with her café, olate skin and impossibly serious dark eyes. Grace, with her copper ringlets and infectious giggle that could light up the darkest room. Caleb, with his warm caramel complexion and surprisingly strong grip that had wrapped around Nora's finger and claimed her heart instantly. City Central was a maze of harsh fluorescent corridors and antiseptic smells that reminded her too painfully of her grandmother's final days. She found the NICU and pressed her face against the viewing window, her heart shattering completely at what she saw. The 3 cribs stood in a neat row, each containing a confused, crying baby. Joy kept reaching through the bars, as if searching desperately for her mother's familiar touch. Grace's usual radiant smile had vanished, replaced by the bewildered tears of an infant who didn't understand why everything felt wrong. Caleb was making soft, whimpering sounds that Tasha used to say meant he was frightened and needed comfort. A social worker approached, a tired-looking woman with kind but weary eyes and a clipboard full of bureaucratic heartbreak. "I'm Linda Carter. I'm terribly sorry for your loss. I want them," Nora said without preamble, never taking her eyes off the babies. "Tasha's children. I want to take them home with me." Linda sighed with practiced patience. "I understand the emotional impulse to help, but caring for 3 infants simultaneously is an enormous responsibility. Are you married? Do you have family support, stable employment, and adequate housing?" Nora finally turned from the window, her jaw set with the same fierce determination that had driven her to crawl into a wrecked car to save a stranger's life. "I have love. That's what matters most. Love doesn't pay for formula, diapers, daycare, or medical bills," Linda said gently but firmly. "These children have extensive needs. The state requires proof of. These children need someone who knew their mother intimately," Nora interrupted, her voice growing passionate. "Someone who was there when they were born, who knows that Joy likes to be rocked counterclockwise, and Grace needs to hear singing to fall asleep, and Caleb calms down when you hum gospel hymns. They need someone who loved Tasha enough to die for her, and who loves them with that same fierce devotion." Linda studied her carefully. "Where do you work, Nora?" "I'm between jobs currently," Nora admitted, hating how pathetic it sounded. "But I'll find employment. I'll work 3 jobs if necessary." "Current living situation?" "A studio apartment on Elm Street." She didn't mention it was above a laundromat in the worst part of town, or that her rent was already 3 weeks overdue. "Mrs. Jenkins, I truly admire your heart, but the state has strict requirements before placing children, especially 3 at once. You'd need larger housing, steady income, character references, proof of stability." "How long do I have?" Nora asked, watching Joy continue to reach desperately through the crib bars. 72 hours to demonstrate you can provide adequate care. If not, they'll be placed in foster care. quite possibly separated into different homes. The thought of these precious babies, Tasha's legacy, being torn apart and scattered to strangers made Nora physically ill. Tasha had grown up in foster care, bounced from house to house like an unwanted burden. She'd sworn her children would never experience that particular form of heartbreak. "I'll make it work," Nora said with unshakable conviction. "Whatever it takes, I'll make it work." The next 2 weeks blurred together in a haze of desperate determination. Nora had already been looking at a larger apartment, and she used her nursing program connections to secure both a weekend position at a local clinic and expanded hours at her current cleaning job. She lied shamelessly to 3 different potential employers about her experience, finally securing a night shift at an all-night diner and a day shift cleaning downtown offices. When she would sleep became a problem for future consideration. She bought a used crib from Goodwill and created 2 additional sleeping spaces from cardboard boxes lined with soft blankets. Formula, diapers, and baby clothes from the dollar store stretched her meager resources to breaking point. It wasn't much, but it represented everything she had to give. On the 3rd day, Linda arrived at the new apartment with the babies and a thick stack of legal documents. "This is highly irregular," she warned, watching Nora settle Joy into her trembling arms. "You'll be monitored closely. Any indication that you can't handle this responsibility—" "I can handle anything for these children," Nora said firmly, feeling Grace curl trustingly against her chest while Caleb wrapped his tiny fingers around hers. "They're mine now. They're my babies." After Linda departed, Nora sank onto the floor of her nearly empty apartment with all 3 babies surrounding her, finally allowing herself to release the grief she'd been holding back. Not quiet, dignified tears, but raw, wrenching sobs that came from the deepest chambers of her soul. "I'm sorry, Tasha," she whispered through her tears. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you the way I saved that stranger in the storm. I'm sorry your babies will grow up poor like we did. But I swear on my grandmother's grave, they'll never doubt they're loved. They'll never feel abandoned or alone. I promise you that with my life." Joy gazed up at her with those impossibly serious dark eyes, as if she understood every word. Grace reached for Nora's face with tiny, curious fingers, and Caleb made the soft cooing sound that meant he felt safe and protected. "Joy, Grace, Caleb," Nora said softly, testing their names on her tongue like a sacred prayer. "You're mine now, and I'm yours. I'm going to love you so fiercely that it'll make up for everything this cruel world tries to take from you." The first night was chaos incarnate. The babies cried in perfectly timed shifts, as if they had coordinated their distress to ensure maximum exhaustion. Nora paced the floor for hours, bouncing one while the other 2 awaited their turns. She sang every lullaby she remembered, hummed every gospel hymn her grandmother had taught her, and whispered promises she had no earthly idea how to keep. By dawn, she was utterly exhausted, completely overwhelmed, and more terrified than she'd ever been. But when Grace finally drifted off to sleep in her arms, tiny fist curled against Nora's neck in perfect trust, she knew she'd made the only choice her heart could live with. These babies were her purpose now, her reason to keep fighting when everything else seemed hopeless. As morning sunlight streamed through their small windows, Nora thought about the man from the storm, Ethan, with his beautiful blue eyes and gentle voice. She wondered if he'd ever known love like this, so fierce it changed the fundamental structure of your soul. She wondered if he'd survived his injuries, if he'd reached his father in time. Most importantly, she wondered if he'd understand why she'd chosen this overwhelming life, 3 babies, and a mountain of struggle over the easier path of letting the state handle everything. Something deep in her heart suggested he would. Something about the way he'd looked at her in those moments between life and death told her he understood sacrifice, to understood what it meant to put love before logic and hearts before convenience. Someday, she whispered to Grace's sleeping face, "I'm going to tell you about the night I learned that some things are worth dying for, and some things like you 3 precious angels are worth living for, no matter how hard it gets." Outside, the world was awakening to another ordinary day, but inside apartment 3B, Nora Jenkins was beginning the extraordinary journey of loving 3 children with the boundless heart of a woman who'd lost everything and found everything in the same breath. The road ahead would be impossibly difficult, but she'd walk it gladly for the privilege of being their mama. Chapter 4. Cruel Whispers. 2 years, 730 days of loving 3 children with every fiber of her being, and still, the whispers followed Nora like poison wherever she went. Look at her, parading around with those babies, 3 different daddies, guaranteed, shameless, Having children she can't afford to properly feed. I heard she's one of those women who sells herself. How else could someone like her manage? The cruel words cut deeper than winter wind. But Nora had learned to keep walking with her head held high. Even when her heart was bleeding, she pushed the second-hand stroller down the cracked sidewalk of Maple Street. 3 beautiful toddlers chattering and pointing at the world with innocent wonder that made every sacrifice worthwhile. Joy, now 3.5, sat regally in front, with her serious dark eyes absorbing everything, like she was cataloging details for future reference. She was the deep thinker, already reading simple words and forming complete sentences with careful precision. Grace bounced beside her, copper curls catching afternoon sunlight as she babbled joyfully to every person they passed. And Caleb, secure in back, hummed one of the gospel songs Nora sang during their bedtime routine, his voice sweet and pure despite his tender age. They were absolutely perfect, intelligent, loving, resilient children who deserved infinitely better than the judgment that followed them like a dark cloud. "Mama, why does that lady keep staring at us with mean eyes?" Joy asked in her clear, observant voice, pointing toward Mrs. Thompson, who stood on her porch with arms crossed, radiating disapproval like heat from a furnace. Nora's heart clenched painfully. At barely 3 years old, Joy was already noticing the stares, the whispers, the way people treated their little family differently. "Some people don't understand families like ours, sweetheart. But that's their problem, not ours." "Are we different?" Grace piped up, her sunny disposition temporarily clouded with confusion. "We are special," Nora said firmly, stopping to kneel beside the stroller. "I love you 3 more than all the stars in heaven, and that love makes us the strongest family in the world. Remember that when people say unkind things." Caleb reached out to pat her cheek with his sticky little hand. "Love you too, Mama. Love you biggest." Those simple words nearly destroyed her composure, as they did every single time these children called her Mama with such complete trust, such pure affection that it made all the sleepless nights and empty stomach pangs seem like small prices to pay. They continued toward Harper's Market. Nora's carefully counted bills crumpled in her worn purse. $41.37 to last until Friday. She'd calculated 3 times. Formula for Grace, who remained picky about solid foods. Milk for the older 2. Bread. Peanut butter. And, if luck smiled on them, maybe some chicken to stretch into soup for the week. The sliding doors wheezed open with mechanical exhaustion. And immediately, Nora felt the familiar weight of judgment settling on her shoulders like lead. Conversations quieted as they passed, eyes tracked their progress down each aisle, and she heard the whispered comments people thought she couldn't detect. 3 babies and no husband in sight. Absolutely shameful. I heard she doesn't even know who fathered them. Living off government assistance, while decent people work honest jobs. If only they knew the truth. If only they understood that Nora worked 3 demanding jobs cleaning offices from 4 o'clock a.m. to 8 o'clock a.m., watching Mrs. Garcia's children from 8:30 a.m. to 3 o'clock p.m., and stocking shelves at Corner Market from 8 o'clock p.m. to midnight. She survived on 4 hours of sleep, lived on coffee and pure determination, and every hard-earned penny went directly to caring for Joy, Grace, and Caleb. But she couldn't reveal the truth about Tasha without dishonoring her best friend's memory. The explanation would only generate more questions, more judgment, more opportunities for small minds to find fault. Better to endure their assumptions and focus on what truly mattered, loving these precious children. "Mama, I'm thirsty," Caleb whispered, tugging gently on her faded jacket. "When we get home, baby boy, Mama's got some nice juice waiting for you." She didn't mention that the juice was mostly water with a splash of apple concentrate to make their supplies last longer. The children never complained, never demanded more than she could provide. Sometimes, their contentment broke her heart more thoroughly than tears would have. At the checkout line, familiar shame washed over her as she counted bills and coins, acutely aware of people behind her watching every transaction with barely concealed disdain. Mrs. Harper, from their small Baptist church, turned with a smile that never quite reached her calculating eyes. "Nora, dear, how are you managing with those 3 little ones?" "We're doing just fine, Mrs. Harper. Thank you for asking. It must be incredibly difficult, especially without." She paused meaningfully, glancing at the children. "Well, without proper male support. Have you considered that there are assistance programs for women in your particular situation?" The condescension dripping from her voice made Nora's jaw clench, but she forced a polite smile. "What situation would that be, ma'am?" "Mrs." Harper flustered, realizing she'd ventured into territory she couldn't navigate gracefully. "Well, I simply meant 3 children is overwhelming for anyone to handle alone." "I'm never alone," Nora said quietly, gathering Joy into her arms as the little girl began to fuss. Sensing adult tension, "I have everything I need right here with me." As they exited the store, Joy looked up with those wise, perceptive eyes. "That church lady was being mean to you, wasn't she, Mama?" Nora's heart fractured a little more. Sometimes grown-ups say thoughtless things without considering how they affect other people. But that's not your concern, precious girl. Your only job is being happy, healthy, and loved. "I am loved," Joy declared with the absolute certainty of a child who'd never questioned it. "You love us bigger than the whole entire universe." Walking home through their neighborhood, a collection of run-down apartments, barred windows, and shattered dreams, Nora reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed since that storm-filled night. Sometimes, in quiet pre-dawn moments when she allowed herself to think about Ethan Caldwell, she wondered what had become of him. Had he recovered completely from his injuries? Had he found peace with his father's death? She still experienced dreams about him occasionally, those storm-blue eyes, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious instead of someone to pity. In her dreams, he found her, told her she was beautiful, made her feel like the angel he'd called her that night. But dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford to indulge. Reality was 3 hungry children, overdue bills, and neighbors who thought they understood her story. The afternoon sun was setting when they reached their building, a 3-story walk-up with peeling paint and a broken front step that the landlord refused to repair. Mrs. Carter from 2A stood on her balcony, arms crossed, watching their approach with obvious disapproval. "Afternoon, Mrs. Carter," Nora called politely, though she knew what was coming. "Those children are getting louder every day," Mrs. Carter complained loudly. "All that crying and carrying on at all hours. Some of us work legitimate jobs and need our sleep." Nora bit back the response that she worked twice as many hours as Mrs. Carter ever had. "I'll make sure they keep it down. They're just excited about being outside." "Well, they better learn some discipline. I'm considering discussing problem tenants with the landlord." The threat was crystal clear, and it terrified Nora more than she'd ever admit. If they lost this apartment, she had nowhere else to go with 3 toddlers. The waiting list for subsidized housing stretched 2 years long, and family shelters often separated mothers from children. Upstairs, in their cramped apartment, Nora began the evening routine that had become their salvation dinner preparation: bath time, stories, and lullabies. She watched Joy patiently help Grace with her sippy cup, saw Caleb spontaneously share his crackers without being asked, and marveled at how much genuine love could flourish in such limited space. "Tell us the story about the princess who saved the prince," Grace requested as Nora tucked them into their shared sleeping area. A mattress on the floor with carefully arranged blankets for safety. It was their favorite tale, one Nora had created from fragments of that night in the storm. In her version, a brave princess found a wounded prince and saved his life with her courageous heart. The grateful prince spent the rest of his days ensuring no one was ever unkind to the princess again. "Did the princess have babies like us?" Caleb asked sleepily. "The princess had the most wonderful children in all the land," Nora said softly, stroking his silky hair, "and she loved them so powerfully that her love made them stronger than any cruel words people might say." "Are we strong, Mama?" Joy whispered. "You're the strongest, bravest, most amazing children who ever lived," Nora assured her, "and no matter what anyone says or thinks, remember that you are deeply loved, completely wanted, and absolutely perfect exactly as you are." As the children drifted into peaceful sleep, Nora sat beside their makeshift bed, watching their serene faces in the dim light filtering through their thin curtains. Tomorrow would bring more whispers, more judgment, more struggle. But tonight, in this precious moment, they were safe and loved, and together. She found herself thinking again of Ethan Caldwell, wondering if he'd ever understand the choice she'd made to love fiercely despite judgment, to sacrifice everything for children who weren't biologically hers, but belonged completely to her heart. She hoped that wherever life had taken him, whatever his circumstances had become, he'd discovered the same kind of transformative love that made all hardship bearable. "Thank you, Tasha," she whispered to the gathering darkness. "Thank you for trusting me with your greatest treasures. I promise I'll never let them forget how much their first mama loved them, and I'll make sure they always know how much their second mama loves them too." Outside, the neighborhood settled into its usual evening symphony of sirens, shouting, and distant music from open windows. But inside apartment 3B, 3 children slept peacefully under the fierce protection of a woman whose love was stronger than poverty, judgment, or fear. Chapter 5. The Discovery. The call arrived on a Tuesday morning that seemed ordinary, but would alter everything forever. Ethan Caldwell stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor, gazing out at the city, sprawling below like a concrete jungle of lost dreams. 8 months, 3 weeks, and 6 days since the accident. They knew the exact count because he'd marked each day like a prisoner awaiting parole, living for the moment he'd find her again. Mr. Caldwell. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Mr. Carter is here to see you. Samuel Carter, the private investigator who'd been searching for Nora, entered with an expression Ethan had learned to read like storm clouds. Today, something fundamental was different. Today, Carter carried the look of a man who'd been sitting on important news. You found her, Ethan said, not bothering with questions. He could feel it in his bones, the same way he'd sensed her presence that night in the storm. I found her 6 months ago, Carter confirmed, placing a manila folder on Ethan's mahogany desk with ceremonial gravity. But Ethan, I wanted to understand her situation completely before we approached, and you needed time to process your father's death. Her circumstances are far more complicated than we imagined. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs as he opened the folder with trembling hands. The first image stole his breath, a photograph taken with a telephoto lens, showing Nora walking down a deteriorating street, pushing a stroller containing 3 small children. Even from a distance, even after 2 agonizing years, she remained breathtakingly beautiful. Her face had matured, showing the weariness that came from carrying impossible burdens on slender shoulders. But her eyes still held that gentle strength that had saved his life. 3 children, Carter said quietly, watching Ethan's reaction carefully. Triplets. Approximately 2.5 years old. Ethan stared at the photograph, his mind reeling with implications. 3 children, born around the time of their fateful meeting. The mathematical possibilities hit him like a physical blow, and for a moment, breathing became impossible. Are they? He couldn't complete the devastating question. I don't believe they're yours. And my investigation confirmed they're not, Carter said carefully. They're the children of her deceased best friend, Tasha Freeman. Birth certificates, hospital records, everything. Checks out. But the neighborhood doesn't know this, and there's significantly more to this story. Ethan, she's living in an extremely rough neighborhood, barely surviving from what I can observe, and the local residents, they're incredibly cruel to her. Ethan's hands trembled as he examined more photographs. Nora at a grocery store, counting coins with heartbreaking precision. Nora leaving a building at dawn, clearly heading to work while the children slept. Nora on a park bench, sharing a single sandwich among all 4 of them, while other mothers whispered and pointed with undisguised contempt. What do you mean, cruel? His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Carter shifted uncomfortably in his chair. There's vicious gossip throughout the neighborhood. Rumors about how she ended up with 3 children. Most of it's absolutely brutal. Ethan, they believe she's, say it clearly, they think she's a prostitute, that the children have different fathers, that she doesn't know their identities. I've heard some of the things people say when they think no one's listening, and it's devastating. Rage, pure and incandescent, coursed through Ethan's veins like molten steel. The woman who'd crawled into twisted wreckage to save his life, who'd risked everything for a complete stranger, was being treated like garbage by people unworthy to breathe her air. Where is she? He demanded, already reaching for his coat with deadly purpose. Ethan, wait. You need to consider this carefully. You don't know the complete story. Maybe those children are hers. Maybe the rumors contain some truth. The rumors are lies, Ethan said with absolute, unshakable certainty. I know her soul. I looked into her eyes for 10 life-changing minutes, and I know exactly who she is. She's incapable of the things they're suggesting. How can you be so completely certain? Ethan touched the locket in his pocket. He'd carried it every single day for 2 years, a talisman of hope and unwavering memory. Because she saved my life, expecting nothing in return. Because she vanished rather than try to profit from her good deed. Because when I was dying, she held my hand and promised I wouldn't face death alone. That's not the behavior of someone who sells herself. That's the behavior of an angel walking among us. Carter sighed. Recognizing the futile task of changing Ethan's iron determination, she lives at 412 Maple Street, Apartment 3B. Ethan, I must ask, what exactly are you planning to do? What I should have done 2 years ago, Ethan replied, heading for the door with renewed purpose. I'm going to find my angel and ensure no one ever hurts her again. The drive to Maple Street took Ethan through sections of the city he'd never seen. Despite living here his entire privileged life, his Mercedes looked absurdly out of place among broken-down vehicles and vacant lots, drawing suspicious stares from people lounging on stoops and gathering around street corners. By the time he reached Nora's building, he understood completely why Carter had seemed so concerned. This wasn't merely poverty, this was desperation made manifest. The kind of place where hope came to die slowly and dreams were luxuries no one could afford. The thought of Nora living here, raising 3 children in this environment, made him physically nauseated. He remained in his car for nearly an hour, watching the building, gathering courage to climb those stairs. What would he say? How did you approach someone after 2 years and explain that you'd never stopped thinking about them, never stopped loving them, despite sharing less than 10 minutes of conversation? Movement in a second-floor window captured his attention, a small face pressed against glass. A little girl with copper curls waving enthusiastically at something below. Then another face appeared, more serious, with dark eyes that reminded him powerfully of Nora. A boy joined them, and all 3 children pressed their faces to the window, pointing and giggling at something in the street. Ethan's heart constricted painfully. They were beautiful children, clearly loved and well cared for despite their harsh circumstances. But even from this distance, he could see how thin they appeared, how their clothes hung loose on small frames. A door slammed somewhere, and the children disappeared from the window. Moments later, Nora emerged from the building, and Ethan's breath caught completely in his throat. She was even more beautiful than his treasured memories had painted her. But there was a fragility now that hadn't existed before. She walked like someone carrying invisible weight, shoulders squared defiantly against the world's judgment. She was heading toward the corner market, he realized. And on impulse, Ethan exited his car and followed at a respectful distance. He needed to understand her daily life, comprehend what she was facing, before disrupting it with his presence. Inside the small market, he observed from behind a display of canned goods as Nora carefully selected items, checking prices twice, returning things she couldn't afford. The store clerk, a middle-aged man with suspicious, calculating eyes, watched her every movement like she might shoplift. "You got money for all that?" the clerk asked rudely as she approached the counter. "Yes, sir." Nora replied quietly, pulling out a handful of crumpled bills and counting them with painstaking care. "Don't know how someone like you affords anything with 3 kids and no visible means of support, unless you're making money the way I heard you do." The ugly insult hung in the air like toxic smoke. Ethan saw Nora's hands shake slightly, saw her chin lift with proud defiance despite the hurt in her eyes, and felt his own hands clench into fists. "That'll be $23. 47, the clerk said, making no effort to hide his disdain. Nora counted her money again, and Ethan witnessed her face fall in defeat. She was short. Perhaps $3 or $4. But it might as well have been 300 for the despair that crossed her features. "I'll put the milk back," she said quietly, reaching for the gallon. "The children need milk more than I need coffee," she murmured to herself. But Ethan heard every heartbreaking word. He couldn't endure another second. Moving without conscious thought, Ethan stepped forward and placed a $50 bill on the counter. "That should cover everything," he said quietly. Nora turned, and when their eyes met, the entire world stopped spinning for a moment that lasted forever. They simply stared at each other. 2 years of longing and loss and desperate hope contained in a single electric look. "Ethan," she whispered. His name falling from her lips like a prayer answered. "Hello, Nora," he said softly, drinking in the sight of her beloved face. "I've been searching for you for what feels like forever." The store clerk looked between them with confusion and growing irritation. "You two know each other?" Neither answered. They were lost in each other's eyes, in the memory of a stormy night that had changed both their lives irrevocably. "I thought you might be dead," Nora said, her voice barely audible. "I went to the hospital repeatedly, but they said you'd been discharged, and I didn't know your last name. And You went to the hospital?" Ethan stepped closer, unable to believe what he was hearing. "You looked for me?" "Every single day for 3 weeks," she admitted, tears beginning to form in her beautiful eyes. "I just needed to know you survived, that you'd reached your father in time." Ethan's heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the same instant. She'd searched for him, she'd cared enough to worry, to hope, to seek him out. All this time, He'd believed she'd simply vanished because she didn't want to see him again. "I didn't make it in time," he said quietly. "My father died while I was unconscious. But, Nora, you saved my life. You gave me a chance to live, to become a better man than I was before that night. I've been trying to find you so I could thank you, so I could." "Excuse me," the clerk interrupted loudly. "This ain't no social club. You buying something or not?" Ethan turned to look at the man, and something in his expression made the clerk take an involuntary step backward. "Give us a moment," he said in a voice that had silenced boardrooms full of aggressive executives. "Ethan," Nora said urgently, "you shouldn't be here. This neighborhood isn't safe for someone like you." "Someone like me?" She gestured helplessly at his expensive suit, his perfect haircut, the watch on his wrist that probably cost more than her annual rent. "You don't belong in this world. Your life and mine. They exist in completely different universes. The only universe I care about is the one with you in it," Ethan said fiercely. "Nora, I haven't experienced a single day of genuine peace since that night. I've thought about you every morning when I wake up and every night before I sleep. I've carried your grandmother's locket like a sacred relic, hoping someday I could return it to you." Her hand flew to her throat, to the place where the locket should have rested. "You have it? My grandmother's necklace?" Ethan pulled the delicate chain from his pocket, and Nora's tears finally spilled over. She reached for it with trembling fingers, then stopped herself. "I can't," she whispered. "People here, they see me talking to a man like you, and the rumors get infinitely worse. The children don't deserve to suffer more because of me." "What rumors?" Ethan demanded, though Carter had already explained. Nora looked away, shame coloring her cheeks. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're alive and safe, and now you need to return to your life and forget about me." "I could never forget about you," Ethan said passionately, "and I'm not going anywhere until you tell me about these children, about why you're living like this, about what's really happening." Before Nora could respond, the store clerk slammed his hand on the counter. "I said, this ain't no social club. Buy something or get out." Ethan fixed the man with a stare that could have frozen hellfire. "I'll purchase this entire store if it means I can speak with this woman in peace. Now step back and give us space, or find yourself looking for new employment." The clerk's eyes widened as he registered Ethan's obvious wealth and authority. He retreated behind the counter, muttering under his breath but no longer daring to interrupt. "Please," Nora whispered, looking around nervously at other customers who were beginning to stare with undisguised curiosity. "Not here. If you truly want to talk, meet me at Lincoln Park tomorrow at noon." "But, Ethan, I'm warning you. When you hear my story, when you understand what people think about me, you're going to wish you'd never found me. There's nothing you could tell me that would make me regret finding you," Ethan said with absolute conviction. "Nothing in this world or the next." Nora gathered her groceries with shaking hands, then looked at him one final time with eyes full of pain and hope and desperate love. "Tomorrow at noon," she said quietly. "And Ethan, thank you for the milk. The children, they really need it." She departed without another word, and Ethan stood in the dingy market, feeling like he'd just been struck by lightning. She was alive. She was here. And tomorrow he would finally learn the truth about the woman who'd haunted his dreams for 2 endless years. As he walked back to his car, he noticed the stares, the whispers, the way people looked at him with suspicion and curiosity. If this was what Nora faced every day simply for being poor, he could only imagine what she endured because of the vicious rumors about her children. Tomorrow, he decided with iron determination, would change everything. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of ensuring his angel never had to face the world's cruelty alone again. Chapter 6. The Approach. Nora arrived at Lincoln Park 30 minutes early, her nerves stretched tighter than violin strings. She'd barely slept the previous night. Torn between desperate hope and paralyzing terror hope that maybe, somehow, Ethan Caldwell could be the miracle she'd never dared pray for. Terror that once he learned the truth about her life, he'd look at her with the same disgust that had become her daily bread. She sat on a weathered bench near the playground, watching children from wealthier neighborhoods play on equipment she could never afford to bring Joy, Grace, and Caleb to. Their clothes were pristine and new, their laughter carefree in a way that made her heart ache. Her phone buzzed Mrs. Garcia, confirming she could watch the children for an extra hour. Nora had fabricated a story about a job interview, not wanting to explain about Ethan. How could she make sense of something she didn't understand herself? "You came." The voice behind her was soft, reverent, and Nora turned to see Ethan approaching with careful steps, He looked different in casual clothes, dark jeans, and a simple blue sweater that made his eyes even more striking. But he still radiated the confidence that came from a life where doors opened and problems dissolved with money. "I wasn't entirely certain you would," she admitted, gesturing for him to sit beside her. "I would have waited here all day if necessary," Ethan said, settling carefully beside her while leaving respectful space. All week, all year, however long it took, the sincerity in his voice made her chest constrict painfully. "Why, Ethan? Why were you searching for me? You don't owe me anything. I simply did what any decent person would have done." "That's where you're absolutely wrong," he said quietly, pulling her grandmother's locket from his pocket and extending it toward her. "Not everyone would have risked their life for a complete stranger. Not everyone would have stayed with me, comforted me, ensured I wasn't alone. You gave me more than just my life that night, Nora. You gave me hope when I had none left." She accepted the locket with trembling fingers, feeling the familiar weight against her palm. For 8 months, she'd mourned its loss almost as deeply as her grandmother's death. Now, having it returned felt like reclaiming a piece of her soul. "I can't accept whatever debt you think you owe me. I'm not Ethan. I'm not the person you think I am." "Then tell me who you are," he said gently, his voice carrying infinite patience. "Tell me about your life, about the children. Help me understand the truth." Nora gazed out at the playground, gathering courage. "Those children, it's complicated," she said quietly, testing the waters. "Their situation isn't what people assume." She felt Ethan's attention intensify, felt him leaning slightly closer without invading her space. "I'd like to understand, if you're willing to share. People in my neighborhood, they don't know the truth. They think I'm a prostitute. They believe I had 3 babies with different men and don't even know who the fathers are. They think I'm trash walking the earth." The words hung between them like an open wound. Nora couldn't bring herself to look at Ethan's face, couldn't bear to witness the moment when understanding dawned and his opinion shifted. "And you allow them to think that," Ethan said slowly, his voice filled with something that sounded like awe. "To protect someone's memory." Nora's head snapped up in shock. There was no judgment in his expression, no disgust or disappointment, only a kind of profound respect that made her feel simultaneously exposed and cherished. "Their mother was my best friend, Tasha. She died in a car accident when they were 15 months old. I couldn't let people gossip about her, so I let them believe what they wanted about me." "And you've sacrificed your reputation to honor your friend's memory," Ethan said with absolute conviction. "I observed you with them yesterday, Nora. I've never seen children who looked more loved, more secure. Despite everything they're facing, they're incredible children," she said, tears threatening. "Joy is brilliant, already reading simple words. Grace has this laugh that could make angels weep with joy, and Caleb has a voice like liquid honey when he sings. They deserve so much better than what I can provide. They have something money can't buy," Ethan said firmly. "They have a mother who loves them unconditionally. Do you have any idea how rare and precious that is? A mother who can barely keep food on the table," Nora said bitterly. "A mother who has to choose between milk and her morning coffee, who can't afford to take them to the doctor when they're sick. A mother who saved a stranger's life and then sacrificed her reputation to honor her friend's memory." Ethan interrupted passionately. "A mother who works 3 jobs without complaint, who shares her last sandwich equally among 3 children, who sings them to sleep every night even when she's exhausted beyond measure." Nora stared at him in amazement. "How do you know all those details?" "I've been observing you," he admitted without shame, "for weeks, since my investigator located you. I needed to understand your life before I approached you. I've seen you leave for work at 4 o'clock in the morning, return home past midnight, and still have endless patience for bedtime stories. You've been watching me?" The invasion of privacy should have made her angry, but instead, she felt oddly protected, as if someone had finally witnessed her struggle and deemed it worthy of attention. "I know you work multiple jobs, that you walk everywhere to save bus fare, and that you turn the heat down at night to keep bills manageable," Ethan continued. "I also know that you are the strongest, most selfless person I've ever encountered, and I know that I've been only half alive for 8 months, waiting to find you again." "Ethan," she whispered, but he continued with growing intensity. "I've thought about you every single day. Nor your face when you promised I wouldn't die alone, your hands so gentle when you were trying to stop the bleeding, the way you disappeared before I could thank you, like some kind of guardian angel who didn't want credit for the miracle." "I'm not an angel," she protested weakly. "I'm just a poor girl trying to take care of 3 babies." "You're my angel," Ethan said with quiet intensity that made her heart skip. "You saved my life, and now I want to save yours." You can't save me, Nora said, pulling her hand away. This is my life, Ethan. This is who I am. I'm not some charity case for you to fix. I'm not talking about charity, he said urgently, his eyes blazing with emotion. I'm talking about love. The word exploded between them like lightning in a clear sky. Nora felt her heart stop, stutter, then begin racing like a thoroughbred. You don't love me, she said desperately. You don't even truly know me. I know that you risk everything for people you care about, Ethan said, his voice growing more passionate. I know that you make 3 children feel like the most precious beings on earth, and I know that when you touch someone, they feel safe for the first time in their life. Ethan, please, I know that I haven't felt genuinely alive since the night I lost you, he continued, moving closer. I know that seeing you struggle while I live in luxury makes me sick with guilt and rage, and I know that I would rather spend one day in poverty with you than a lifetime of wealth without you. Nora was crying openly now, overwhelmed by words she'd never expected to hear, feelings she'd never dared to hope for. It's not that simple. You're wealthy. I'm poor. You're respected. I'm the neighborhood pariah. People would say terrible things about us. Let them talk, Ethan said fiercely. I've spent my entire life caring what people think, and where did it get me? An empty penthouse, and a heart that felt dead until I saw your face again. I don't care about money or reputation. I only care about you and the children. She asked quietly, her voice the barest whisper. The children, they come with me, Ethan. I won't abandon them for anyone. I'm counting on that, he said, smiling for the first time since they'd sat down. Joy, Grace, and Caleb, right? I want to meet them properly. I want to be part of their lives, if you'll allow me. You want to help raise 3 children who aren't even yours? Nora asked in disbelief. I want to help love 3 children who already belong to my heart because they belong to yours, Ethan corrected gently. Nora, I know this is overwhelming, but I'm asking you to take a chance on us. Let me court you properly. Let me show you that what we felt that night in the storm was real, that it's worth fighting the entire world for. Nora looked into his eyes and saw everything she'd been afraid to dream of: love without conditions, acceptance without judgment, a future where her children could have everything she'd never been able to provide. But she also saw the impossibility of it. The vast gulf between their worlds. I need time to think, she said finally. It's a lot to process. Of course, Ethan said immediately. Take all the time you need. But, Nora, promise me you won't disappear again. Promise me, you'll give us a chance to see what we could become together. She nodded slowly, clutching her grandmother's locket like a lifeline. I promise, but, Ethan, you need to understand what you're asking for. Loving me means taking on a life full of struggle and judgment and problems that money can't always solve. Then it's fortunate I'm not afraid of a challenge, he said with a smile that made her heart flutter like butterfly wings. The woman who saved my life in a storm she's worth fighting the whole world for. As they parted ways, Ethan to his Mercedes, Nora to the bus stop, both carried the electric awareness that everything was about to change irrevocably. For better or worse, their worlds were about to collide in ways that would test every assumption they'd ever made about love, sacrifice, and what it truly meant to save someone's life. Chapter 7. Growing Closer. The first time Ethan met the children properly, Joy studied him with those impossibly serious dark eyes for 10 full minutes before speaking a single word. Are you the prince from Mama's story? She asked finally, her small voice filled with curiosity and careful caution. Ethan knelt to her level, understanding instinctively that this moment would determine everything that followed. I don't know about being a prince, but your mama is definitely the angel who saved my life. Grace, ever the fearless one, stepped forward boldly and touched his face with sticky fingers. You have pretty eyes, like the sky when it's happy. Caleb hung back initially, humming one of his gospel songs and observing with wisdom that seemed far too ancient for his young face. When Ethan looked directly at him, the little boy stopped humming and offered a smile so pure and trusting, it nearly brought Ethan to his knees. They like you, Nora said softly, wonder evident in her voice. They're usually quite shy with strangers. Maybe I'm not a stranger, Ethan replied, his eyes never leaving hers. Maybe some souls recognize each other immediately. That conversation had occurred 3 weeks ago, and now Ethan's presence had become intricately woven into the fabric of their daily lives. He appeared every evening after work, bringing groceries that he claimed were extras, toys that were supposedly samples, and books that happened to be lying around his apartment. Tonight, he sat on the floor of their tiny living room, Grace curled against his side as he read Goodnight Moon, his patient voice never betraying irritation at the repetition, Joy was teaching him to braid her doll's hair with intense concentration, while Caleb sat contentedly in Nora's lap, humming along to Ethan's reading. "I think it's time for bed." Nora interjected when Grace demanded another reading. "Will you sing to us?" Joy asked Ethan hopefully, and Nora's heart clenched. The children had begun looking to Ethan for comfort, security, affection. "I'm not much of a singer," Ethan said apologetically, "but maybe your mama will sing while I listen." As Nora went through the bedtime routine, Ethan helped without being asked. He lifted Caleb into the bathtub with careful gentleness, helped Grace locate her favorite stuffed elephant, sat patiently while Joy read him a story she'd invented about a dragon who learned to share. When the children were finally settled, Nora sang the lullaby her grandmother had sung to her. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching with an expression of such tender longing that it made her breath catch. "You're natural at this," she said quietly, when they moved to the kitchen. "I've never experienced this before," Ethan admitted, drying dishes in her small sink, a family dinner, bedtime stories, children who trust me to keep them safe. "I didn't know it could feel so sacred." They worked in comfortable silence until they stood facing each other in the narrow space between counter and table. "Nora," Ethan said softly, reaching up to touch her face, "I need to tell you something important." The gentleness in his voice made her heart race dangerously. "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply, honestly. Not just grateful, not just infatuated. Really, truly, completely in love with you, and those 3 beautiful children, and this life you've built, with nothing but determination and faith. "Ethan," she whispered, but he pressed on. "I know it's too soon to say such things, but I need you to know, when I watch you with Joy, Grace, and Caleb, when I see how they look at you like you hung the moon and stars, when I see you give them everything without a second thought, I fall deeper every time." Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm scared. This feels too good to be real. Men like you don't fall in love with women like me." "What kind of woman are you, Nora?" he asked, moving closer. "Poor, uneducated, struggling, carrying baggage that isn't even mine." "You're brave," Ethan corrected firmly. "You're loving, generous, strong beyond measure. You're a woman who saves lives and sacrifices for others and makes 3 children feel like royalty even when you're eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. Those children deserve so much better." "Those children have the best mother in the world," he interrupted passionately. "And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life helping you give them everything they deserve." Before Nora could respond, the sound of loud arguing echoed from outside, followed by someone banging on trash cans. Ethan moved protectively in front of her as they both rushed to the window. Down on the street, a small group of neighbors had gathered, their faces twisted with anger and disgust. "Mrs. Thompson stood in the center, pointing up at Nora's window with accusatory fury. "Look at her up there with that rich white man," she shouted venomously. "I told you all she was selling herself. Now she's moved up to expensive clients." "Disgusting," another voice called out. "Those poor children, having to watch their mother sell herself out. Someone should call social services." "Mrs. Carter added with malicious satisfaction, Ethan's hands clenched into fists, his entire body radiating barely controlled fury. "I'm going down there." "No," Nora said quickly, grabbing his arm. "That will only make everything infinitely worse. They're looking for a reason to cause trouble." Someone threw a bottle that shattered against the building wall below their window. In the bedroom, one of the children started crying in fear. "They're terrorizing innocent children," Ethan said, his voice dangerous. "This is my life, Ethan," Nora said, her voice breaking as she hurried to comfort the frightened children. "This is what I tried to warn you about. Being with me means dealing with this hatred." Joy was sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. "Mama, why are they yelling? Why are they angry at us? Some people don't understand our family, precious girl," Nora said, pulling all 3 children close. "But they can't hurt us as long as we love each other." Grace buried her face against Nora's shoulder. "I'm scared, Mama. I know, sweetheart, but we're safe up here. No one can hurt us while we're together." Ethan stood in the doorway, watching the woman he loved, comfort 3 terrified children while an angry mob gathered outside their home, and something fundamental shifted inside him. This wasn't just about his feelings anymore. This was about protecting a family that had become his heart and soul. "I have an idea," he said quietly, when the children had finally fallen back asleep. "But you're not going to like it." "What kind of idea?" Nora asked wearily. "Move in with me," he said simply. "All 4 of you. My penthouse has 3 spacious bedrooms, security that won't let anyone near you. The children could have their own rooms, proper beds, a safe place to play. Absolutely not, Nora said immediately. Ethan, I can't be your kept woman. That would only prove what everyone already believes about me. Then marry me, he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Nora stared at him like he'd sprouted wings. You're completely insane, she whispered finally. We've known each other for 3 weeks. I've loved you for 8 months, he countered. And not just loved the idea of you, but loved the reality of who you are. I've seen you at your most vulnerable, most overwhelmed, and I've never been more certain of anything in my entire life. Marriage is about more than love, Ethan. It's about compatibility. About building a life together. About choosing to love someone every day for the rest of your life, he interrupted. About putting their needs above your own. About protecting and cherishing them, no matter what the world throws at you. Tell me you haven't felt that. Tell me you don't love me too. Nora closed her eyes, feeling the weight of loneliness and struggle pressing against the hope that bloomed whenever she looked at him. Of course I love you. How could I not? But, Ethan, loving you and building a life with you are two entirely different things. Are they? He asked gently. Because when I imagine my future, all I see is you and Joy and Grace and Caleb. I see birthday parties and Christmas mornings and helping with homework and growing old with you, falling more in love with you every year. The picture he painted was so beautiful that it made her chest ache with longing. What about your business, your social life? My business runs itself. My social life was empty anyway, Ethan said firmly. The only expectations that matter now are the ones I have for our family. Our family, Nora repeated softly. Our family, he confirmed. You, me, Joy, Grace, Caleb, and maybe someday a little brother or sister for them to love and protect. The image of a baby with Ethan's blue eyes and her smile, surrounded by Joy's careful attention, Grace's infectious joy, and Caleb's gentle songs, was almost too perfect to bear. This is completely crazy, she said, but there was less conviction in her voice now. The best things usually are, Ethan replied, moving closer. Nora, I'm not asking you to decide tonight. I'm just asking you to think about it, to consider that maybe some love stories are meant to overcome impossible odds. Outside, the crowd was finally dispersing, but the broken glass remained as a reminder of the hatred they'd face. Inside, 3 children slept peacefully, trusting that the adults who loved them would keep them safe. I need time, Nora said finally. Take all the time you need, Ethan assured her. But while you're thinking, remember this. I'm not offering to rescue you. I'm asking if you'll save me one more time, because without you, without this family, I'm just a man with money and no heart to spend it on. As he prepared to leave, Ethan kissed her forehead with infinite tenderness. I love you, Nora Jenkins, he said against her skin. And I love Joy and Grace and Caleb like they were my own blood. That's not going to change. Whether you marry me tomorrow or never, that's just who I am now. After he left, Nora sat in her tiny living room, touching her grandmother's locket and thinking about the man who'd entered their lives like answered prayer. The smart thing would be to protect herself, to remember that fairy tales didn't happen to girls like her. But as she looked at the 3 sleeping children who taught her that love could transform anything, she wondered if maybe it was time to stop being smart and start being brave. Chapter 8. The Breaking Point. The knock came at 8:17 on a Tuesday morning that had begun like any other. Nora had just finished feeding the children breakfast oatmeal, sweetened with brown sugar packets she'd saved from the restaurant, when 3 sharp official raps echoed through their tiny apartment like gunshots. Through the peephole, she saw 2 women in crisp business suits, holding clipboards and wearing expressions of professional concern. Her blood turned to ice water. She'd seen those suits before, in the foster homes of her childhood, in the nightmares that still jolted her awake in cold sweats. Child Protective Services. Can I help you? She asked through the door, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. Miss Jenkins, I'm Margaret Evans from CPS, and this is my colleague, Susan Bennett. We need to speak with you regarding your children. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs as she slowly opened the door, positioning herself to block their view of the children, who were still at the kitchen table. Joy had gone very quiet, her serious eyes fixed on the strangers with uncanny perception. Grace continued chattering to her stuffed elephant. Oblivious to the approaching danger, Caleb had stopped his morning humming entirely. What's this about? Nora asked, though she already knew with sickening certainty. Someone had called them, someone who'd seen Ethan coming and going, who decided that a poor black woman with 3 children and a wealthy white man could only mean one thing. We've received multiple reports over the past several months about your living situation, Margaret said. Her voice professionally neutral, but her eyes already cataloging every detail of the small apartment. The complaints have escalated recently, with concerns about the children's welfare, the adequacy of care, and alleged inappropriate behavior in the home. Inappropriate behavior? Nora's voice rose slightly before she caught herself. Getting angry would only make things infinitely worse. Reports suggest you may be entertaining men for money while the children are present, Susan said, her tone suggesting she'd rather be anywhere else on earth. We're required to investigate any claims that children might be exposed to prostitution. The word hit Nora like a physical blow to the stomach. She'd known this day might come, had prepared for it in her darkest moments, but hearing it spoken aloud in front of her children made her feel violently ill. That's not what's happening here, she said firmly, fighting to keep her voice level. Ethan Caldwell is a friend who's been helping us. There's nothing inappropriate about our relationship. Ethan Caldwell. Margaret's eyebrows shot up. The businessman. Miss Jenkins, surely you understand how this appears a man of his wealth and status, spending time with a woman in your circumstances. My circumstances? Nora's temper flared despite her efforts to stay calm. You mean being poor? Since when is poverty a crime? Mama? Joy's small voice came from behind her, carrying a note of fear that broke Nora's heart. What's wrong? Who are these ladies? Margaret and Susan exchanged a meaningful look. We need to see the children, Miss Jenkins, Margaret said, and we need to inspect the living conditions thoroughly. Nora had no choice but to step aside. The women entered her tiny apartment, and she watched their faces as they took in the reality of their life, the second-hand furniture, the makeshift sleeping arrangements, the clothes hanging in the bathroom. Everything she'd worked so hard to make warm and loving suddenly looked shabby and inadequate through their professional eyes. Hello there, Margaret said to Joy with the fake brightness adults used when they were about to destroy a child's world. I'm Margaret. Can you tell me your name? Joy looked at Nora for permission before speaking. Joy. And that's Grace and Caleb. They're my brother and sister. And who takes care of you, Joy? Mama does, Joy said with simple certainty that made Nora's heart swell and break simultaneously. She loves us bigger than the whole world. Susan was taking notes, examining the kitchen, checking the locks on the windows with methodical precision. Miss Jenkins, can you provide documentation of your income, proof that you can adequately provide for 3 children? I work 3 jobs, Nora said, moving protectively closer to the children. I provide everything they need. The apartment seems overcrowded. Do the children have adequate sleeping arrangements? Nora gestured to the bedroom, where she'd carefully arranged sleeping spaces. It wasn't perfect, but it was clean, safe, and filled with love. This is temporary, she said. I'm saving for a larger place. We need to ask some questions about the man who's been visiting, Margaret said, sitting at the children's eye level. Joy, sweetie, can you tell me about the man who comes to visit your mama? Joy's face lit up like Christmas morning. You mean Ethan? He reads us stories and helps Mama with dinner, and he knows all the words to Goodnight Moon, and he's going to teach me to play chess when I'm bigger, and he makes Mama smile real pretty. Does he ever make you feel scared or uncomfortable? Joy looked genuinely confused. No, Ethan makes everything better. He makes Mama smile. And when he's here, Grace doesn't have bad dreams. And Caleb sings louder. Caleb, who'd been watching the proceedings with his usual quiet wisdom, suddenly started humming Amazing Grace. His sweet voice filled the small room, and both social workers seemed startled by the pure beauty of it. Caleb likes music, Nora explained, her voice thick with emotion. He sings when he feels safe and happy, and he's been singing more since Ethan started coming around, Margaret asked, making careful notes. This Ethan? Yes, Nora admitted. Not understanding why that felt like a trap being set, the interview continued for over an hour. They checked the refrigerator, examined the children's clothes, tested the smoke detector, and asked endless questions about Ethan's visits, his relationship with the children, and Nora's work schedule. Mama works really hard. Grace piped up at one point, apparently deciding she needed to defend Nora. She sings to us when we're sad, and she shares her food with us. And she tells us stories about the princess who saved the prince. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of invasion and judgment, the women gathered their papers and prepared to leave. Miss Jenkins, we'll need to schedule a follow-up visit, Margaret said, and we'll need you to provide character references, proof of stable income, and documentation of adequate housing arrangements. What happens if I can't? Nora asked. Though she already knew the answer that would haunt her dreams, we may need to place the children in foster care temporarily until we can verify that this is a safe and stable environment for them. The words hit Nora like bullets to the chest. Foster care, the nightmare she'd fought so hard to save Joy, Grace, and Caleb from. The system that had broken her own childhood and Tasha's. They're not in danger, she said desperately. Look at them. Do they look neglected? Abused? They're happy, healthy children who are loved more than life itself. Love isn't always enough, Miss Jenkins, Margaret said with what seemed like genuine sympathy. Children need stability, adequate resources, appropriate supervision. We'll be in touch within 72 hours. After they left, Nora sank onto the couch and pulled all 3 children into her arms, holding them like they might disappear if she loosened her grip. Joy was crying, though she probably didn't understand why. Grace was chattering nervously, asking why the ladies had so many questions. Caleb had stopped humming entirely. Are they going to take us away, Mama? Joy asked with the devastating perception of a child who'd sensed something terrible in the adult conversation. No, baby girl, Nora said fiercely, though her voice shook with terror. I'll never let anyone take you away from me. Never, never, never. But even as she said the words, she knew how powerless she really was. 3 jobs that barely paid the bills, an apartment that was too small, a neighborhood that saw her as a disgrace. What did she have to fight CPS with? Her phone rang, and Ethan's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, she considered not answering. How could she tell him that his presence in their lives had triggered this nightmare? Nora, his voice was warm, happy, completely unaware of the devastation that had just crashed into their world. I was thinking about taking everyone to the zoo this weekend. Joy mentioned she's never seen a real elephant, and I thought, Ethan, she interrupted, her voice breaking. We need to talk. Something terrible has happened. The change in his tone was immediate. What's wrong? Are the children okay? Are you hurt? Child Services came this morning, she said, and heard his sharp intake of breath. Someone reported us. They think I'm prostituting myself because of you visiting. Jesus Christ, he breathed. Nora, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should have been more careful, more discreet. It's not your fault, she said, though part of her wondered if that was true. But, Ethan, they might take them if I can't prove. I can provide adequate care. If I can't show stable income and proper housing, then we get married, he said immediately. Tomorrow, today, right now, I'll provide the stability they're looking for and prove their point. Nora laughed bitterly. A poor woman marrying a rich man right after CPS gets involved? That'll look absolutely perfect. I don't care how it looks, Ethan said fiercely. I care about protecting our family. Your family, she corrected. Ethan, maybe you should stay away for a while, until this blows over. The silence that followed was so long she thought the call had dropped. Are you asking me to abandon you? He asked finally, his voice carefully controlled. I'm asking you to think about what's best for the children, Nora said, tears streaming down her face. If your presence is what's causing this problem, my presence isn't the problem, Ethan interrupted. Racism is the problem. Classism is the problem. A system that would rather tear apart a loving family than admit that love comes in many forms, that's the problem. But if staying away means they can stay with me, Nora, Ethan said, his voice gentle but unbreakable, I'm coming over. No, she said quickly. If they're watching, if someone sees you, then let them see me, he said. Let them see a man who loves his family and won't be scared away by small-minded people who think they know what's best for children they've never met. Ethan, please, I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. And, Nora, we're going to fight this together. I won't let them take our children. Our children, even in the midst of this nightmare. Those words made her heart soar and break at the same time. After he hung up, Nora held Joy, Grace, and Caleb close, breathing in their sweet scent, memorizing the weight of their small bodies against hers. In 72 hours, CPS would return with their decision. In 72 hours, she might lose the 3 people who'd given her life, meaning, but until then, she would love them with everything she had. And maybe, if she was very lucky, love would be enough after all. Chapter 9. Truth and Redemption. Ethan arrived at Nora's apartment to find her packing a small suitcase with trembling hands. Her face streaked with tears. She'd tried desperately to hide from the children. Joy, Grace, and Caleb sat on the bed, watching with wide-eyed confusion, sensing their world was crumbling but not understanding why. "What are you doing?" he asked gently, though his heart was already breaking at the obvious answer. "Getting ready," Nora said without looking up, folding the children's few clothes with mechanical precision. "If they come back and decide to take them, I want their things prepared. I want them to have something familiar, something that smells like home." "Nora, stop." Ethan sat beside her on the bed, stilling her frantic hands with infinite gentleness. "They're not taking these children anywhere." "You don't know that," she whispered. "You didn't see how they looked at this place, at me, like I was already guilty of something unforgivable." "Mama, are we going somewhere?" Grace asked, her usual bright chatter subdued by the heavy tension. "Maybe, baby girl," Nora said, her voice breaking. "But wherever you go, remember that Mama loves you more than all the stars in the sky, okay? I don't want to go anywhere without you," Joy said fiercely, throwing her small arms around Nora's neck. "You're our mama. You belong with us forever and ever." Caleb started humming Amazing Grace again, but this time it sounded like a prayer for comfort rather than joy. Ethan watched the scene with a rage so pure it nearly consumed him. Somewhere in this city, small-minded people had made phone calls that might destroy the most beautiful family he'd ever witnessed. "I have an idea," he said quietly, "but I need to make some calls first." "Ethan, whatever you're thinking, trust me," he interrupted, kissing her forehead gently. "Just trust me." "Can you do that?" Nora looked into his eyes and saw determination burning like an unquenchable flame. Slowly, she nodded. For the next hour, Ethan made call after call from Nora's tiny kitchen while she tried to maintain normalcy for the children. He spoke in low, urgent tones to lawyers, to private investigators, to contacts she didn't know he possessed. Finally, he returned with an expression she couldn't read. "Pack a bag for yourself, too," he said. "We're going to a hotel tonight, and tomorrow we're going to have visitors, good ones this time." Before Nora could ask what he meant, there was another knock at the door. Her heart lurched. But Ethan's steady presence was reassuring. "That's someone who's going to help us," he said. Nora opened the door to find an elderly African-American woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, holding a worn cardboard box, and looking determined. "Are you Nora Jenkins?" the woman asked. "I'm Evelyn Freeman. I was Tasha's aunt." The world tilted sideways. Nora gripped the doorframe, staring at this stranger who might hold the key to everything. "Tasha's aunt," she managed. "She never mentioned. We lost touch when she was young," Evelyn said sadly. "Family troubles. Pride. Stupid disagreements that seem so small now. I only learned about her death recently when I hired someone to help me find her." She looked past Nora to where Joy, Grace, and Caleb peeked out from behind the couch, and her face crumpled with joy and grief. "Oh, my Lord," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "They look just like her. That little girl has Tasha's exact eyes, and the boy has her smile." "How did you find us?" Nora asked, still reeling. "I hired Mr. Carter, the same investigator this gentleman uses," Evelyn said, nodding at Ethan. "He's been helping me search for family for months. When he connected our cases and told me about your situation, about what people were saying, about the threats from child services, I knew I had to come forward immediately." She held up the cardboard box with reverence. "Tasha's birth certificate, hospital records from when the babies were born, letters she wrote to me that I was too stubborn to answer. And this." Evelyn pulled out a cell phone and pressed play on a video. Suddenly, Tasha's voice filled the tiny apartment, young and scared but determined. "Aunt Evelyn, I know you probably won't get this message, but if something happens to me, I need you to know about my babies Joy, Grace, and Caleb. They're the most beautiful children in the world, and I love them more than life itself. If I die, my best friend Nora promised to take care of them. She's the only family I trust, the only person who loved me unconditionally. Please don't let the state separate them. Please help Nora keep them together. She's more their mother than I ever got the chance to be." Nora sank onto the couch, tears streaming down her face as Tasha's voice continued, describing each child's personality, their favorite songs, their fears and dreams. "There's more," Evelyn said gently, sitting beside Nora. "Medical records, DNA tests Tasha had done to establish paternity, letters of recommendation from doctors and neighbors who knew what kind of mother she was trying to be." "Why are you sharing this with us?" Ethan asked. Evelyn looked at him with the piercing gaze of a woman who'd lived long enough to recognize truth. "Because I've spent weeks learning about what happened to these babies after Tasha died. I know about the sacrifice this young woman made, taking on 3 children when she could barely feed herself. That makes you more family than blood ever could." Joy had crept closer during the conversation, her serious eyes fixed on Evelyn. "Are you our real grandma?" she asked with the directness of a child. Evelyn's face lit up with wonder. "Would you like me to be, sweetheart?" "We don't have a grandma," Grace said, joining her sister. "Just Mama and Ethan and each other." "Well, now you have a grandma too," Evelyn said, her voice thick with emotion. Caleb, who'd been listening with his usual quiet intensity, suddenly walked over to Evelyn and climbed into her lap. He began humming Amazing Grace again, but this time it sounded like pure celebration. "He does that when he feels safe," Nora explained. Wonder in her voice. "Smart boy," Evelyn said, stroking his hair. "Music tells the truth when words aren't enough." The next morning, Evelyn made good on her promise. Armed with legal documents, photographs, and righteous fury, she visited every person who'd spread rumors about Nora. She went to Mrs. Thompson's house, to the church where gossip had flourished, to the corner market where the clerk had been so cruel. Over the following week, a few shame-faced neighbors began appearing at Nora's door. Mrs. Harper from church brought a casserole and a quiet apology. The store clerk offered a small gift card and mumbled words about being too quick to judge. Mrs. Carter came downstairs with red eyes, though several other neighbors remained hostile and unconvinced. When Margaret and Susan from CPS arrived for their follow-up visit, they found a completely different scene. Evelyn was there with her box of documents. Ethan was there with character references from business associates and bank statements proving financial stability. The apartment was filled with food brought by repentant neighbors and toys donated by church members. "Miss Jenkins," Margaret said, looking around in amazement, "this is quite a transformation from our last visit. The truth has a way of changing everything," Evelyn said, handing over Tasha's documents. "These children have never been in danger. They've been loved, protected, and cherished by a woman who sacrificed everything to honor her friend's dying wish." As the social workers reviewed the evidence, the video, the birth certificates, the medical records, the letters of support, their entire demeanor shifted. What had seemed like potential neglect became a story of extraordinary love and sacrifice. "Miss Jenkins," Susan said finally, "I owe you a profound apology. The initial report was clearly based on misunderstandings and prejudice. These children are obviously thriving in your care." "So they can stay?" Nora asked, hardly daring to hope. "They can stay," Margaret confirmed. "In fact, I'd like to recommend that you be commended for your dedication. What you've done taking on 3 children as a single woman, working multiple jobs, creating a loving home despite incredible challenges, it's truly remarkable." As the CPS workers prepared to leave, Joy stopped them. "Margaret," she said, tugging on the social worker's jacket. "Yes, sweetheart? Mama told us you were here to make sure we were safe and loved," Joy said with her usual serious demeanor. "Well, we're really, really loved. So thank you for checking. But you don't have to worry about us anymore. We're exactly where we belong." After everyone left, the small apartment felt different, not just because of the gifts and food, but because the weight of judgment and fear had finally lifted. Nora sat on the couch with all 3 children in her arms, marveling at how quickly a nightmare could transform into a miracle. "So," Ethan said, sitting beside them with a smile that lit up his entire face, "I believe someone mentioned something about a wedding. Is that a proposal, Mr. Caldwell?" Nora asked, her heart soaring with joy and hope. "That's a promise, Miss Jenkins," he replied, pulling her close. "A promise that you'll never face anything alone again, that these children will have everything they need and more, and that love really can conquer all." Joy looked up at them with those wise, serious eyes. "Does this mean Ethan gets to be our daddy for real?" "If that's what you want, sweetheart," Ethan said gently. "I want," Grace announced immediately. "And Caleb wants too. Don't you, Caleb?" Caleb's response was to start humming the wedding march, though Nora was fairly certain he'd never heard it before. Some things, she thought, the heart just knew. As the afternoon sun streamed through their windows, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought them here from a stormy night and a car wreck to a love that had weathered every storm society could throw at them. The truth had set them free. Now all that remained was to build the beautiful life they dreamed of together. Chapter 10. Love's Greatest Triumph. 6 months later, on a perfect spring morning when the world seemed painted in pure hope and golden sunlight, Nora Jenkins stood before the mirror in the bridal suite of Holy Trinity Church, hardly recognizing the radiant woman staring back at her. The dress was breathtakingly simple yet stunning ivory silk that Ethan had lovingly insisted on purchasing, with delicate pearl beading that caught the light like captured starlight. Evelyn had spent hours arranging Nora's hair into an elegant updo, weaving in baby's breath and the small pearl pins that had belonged to Tasha. Around her neck, Her grandmother's locket rested against her heart, finally returned to where it belonged. But it wasn't the dress or the expertly applied makeup that transformed her appearance. It was the luminous radiance that came from a heart finally at complete peace, a soul that had found its perfect match. "You look like a real princess, Mama," Joy said from behind her, carefully holding Grace's hand while Evelyn finished adjusting her flower girl dress. "The most beautiful princess in the whole entire world," Grace added, bouncing with barely contained excitement. "And Ethan gets to be your prince forever and ever." Caleb, devastatingly handsome in his tiny black tuxedo, was practicing walking slowly, like Evelyn had patiently taught him. Carrying the satin pillow with their rings, he'd been humming "Here Comes the Bride" all morning, his sweet voice filling the room with pure joy. "Are you ready for this momentous day, child?" Evelyn asked, stepping back to admire her handiwork with pride. In the months since she'd entered their lives, Tasha's aunt had become the grandmother the children had never known, and the mother figure Nora had lost too young. "I've been ready for this my entire life," Nora said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I just didn't know it until a storm brought us together." A gentle knock interrupted their preparations, and Ethan's best man, Samuel Carter, peeked inside. "Ladies, we're ready to begin." "Ethan's pacing a hole in the sanctuary floor, and I genuinely think he might faint if we make him wait much longer." Nora laughed, her heart swelling with overwhelming love for the man who'd proven that fairy tales could come true for girls like her. "Tell him I'll be right there." The music began. The wedding march played on the church's old organ with heartfelt reverence, and Nora felt her heart begin to race with anticipation. Through the slightly open door, she could see the sanctuary filled with people she'd never imagined would be their neighbors, who'd once whispered cruel things now sat in the pews with genuine smiles. Mrs. Harper and the other church ladies had spent days decorating with fresh flowers and flickering candles. But most importantly, Ethan was there, standing at the altar in his perfectly tailored black tuxedo, looking more handsome than any man had a right to be, his storm blue eyes searching desperately for her. When their gazes met, he smiled that brilliant, heart-stopping smile that had become her favorite sight in the entire world. "Ready, my precious angels?" Evelyn asked, gathering the children with loving care. Joy walked first, scattering rose petals with serious concentration. Grace skipped beside her, giggling and waving at everyone she recognized. Caleb followed with solemn dignity, carrying the rings with such careful reverence that several people in the congregation murmured appreciatively. Then it was Nora's turn. She walked down the aisle alone. By deliberate choice, she'd raised herself, saved herself, and fought for her family by herself for so long. Today, she was choosing to share her life not because she needed rescuing, but because she'd found someone worthy of her strength. Every step brought her closer to Ethan, and with each one, she remembered the incredible journey that had brought them here. The storm that had nearly taken his life but given them both a future beyond imagination, the months of searching and longing, the challenges they'd faced together, the judgment they'd overcome, the love that had grown stronger with every obstacle. When she reached the altar, Ethan took her hands in his, and she could see tears of pure joy shining in his beautiful eyes. "You came," he whispered, just for her ears. "I promised I would," she whispered back, remembering another promise she'd made in a wrecked car on a stormy night. "I told you that you wouldn't be alone, and I meant it with my whole heart." Pastor Thompson began the ceremony with eloquent words about love conquering all obstacles, about the beauty of chosen family, about the miracle of two souls finding each other across impossible odds. But Nora barely heard his words. She was lost in Ethan's eyes, in the feeling of his strong hands holding hers, in the knowledge that after today, she would never be alone again. "Do you, Ethan Charles Caldwell, take Nora Louise Jenkins to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer and for poorer, for better and for worse, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Ethan said, his voice strong and clear, carrying to every corner of the sanctuary. "With all my heart, for all my life, forever and always, I do." "And do you, Nora Louise Jenkins, take Ethan Charles Caldwell to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer and for poorer, for better and for worse, for as long as you both shall live?" Nora looked at Ethan, then at the three children standing beside them, Joy with her serious smile, Grace bouncing with excitement, Caleb humming softly under his breath. She thought of Tasha, of her grandmother, of all the people who'd loved her and shaped her into the woman she'd become. "I do," she said, her voice ringing with joy that echoed through the sanctuary. "Forever and always. With everything I am, I do." The rings were exchanged, simple gold bands that felt heavy with promise and hope. Ethan's hands shook slightly as he slipped hers onto her finger, and Nora's tears finally spilled over as she did the same for him. "By the power vested in me by the state and by God above, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Thompson declared with a radiant grin. "Ethan, you may kiss your bride." Ethan cupped Nora's face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears of pure happiness. "I love you, Mrs. Caldwell," he said softly. "I love you too, Mr. Caldwell," she replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst with joy. Their kiss was tender, passionate, and full of promise for all their tomorrows. It lasted long enough for the congregation to cheer enthusiastically, for the children to clap excitedly, and for both of them to remember why they'd fought so hard to reach this perfect moment. The reception was held in the church fellowship hall, transformed with twinkling white lights and spring flowers into something absolutely magical. Ethan and Nora danced their first dance to "At Last" by Etta James, swaying together as if they were the only two people in the universe. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked as the song ended. "Only one," Nora said, and his face fell until she smiled mischievously. "I regret that we wasted 8 months apart when we could have been building this beautiful life together." "We weren't ready then," Ethan said wisely. "You needed to become the incredible mother you are, and I needed to learn what really mattered in life." Everything happened exactly when it was supposed to. Later, as the celebration wound down and the children fell asleep in chairs decorated with ribbon and flowers, Ethan and Nora stood together, watching their wedding guests, some former enemies turned friends, strangers turned family, and a community slowly learning to choose love over judgment. Though they knew some neighbors would never change their hearts. "What happens now?" Nora asked, leaning against her husband's strong chest. "Now we go home," Ethan said, kissing the top of her head tenderly, "to our real home, where Joy can have her own room with towering bookshelves, where Grace can dance without bothering neighbors, where Caleb can have a piano to play his music on, and where we can start our new life together." 2 months later, Ethan stood in the courthouse, holding a folder of legal documents, watching Nora sign the papers that would make their family official in the eyes of the law. Joy, Grace, and Caleb sat beside them, dressed in their finest clothes, waiting for the moment that would change their names and their lives forever. Joy Caldwell, the judge announced as the first adoption was finalized. Grace Caldwell. Caleb Caldwell. Congratulations. You now have a legal father who will love and protect you for the rest of your lives. "Daddy!" Grace shouted joyfully, throwing herself into Ethan's arms. "We're really your babies now." "You were always my babies," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion as he hugged all 3 children close. "Now we just have the papers to prove it to the world." Joy, ever the serious one, looked up at him with those wise, dark eyes. "Does this mean we're a real family now, sweetheart?" "We became a real family the moment we chose to love each other," Nora said, kneeling down to her level. "The papers just make it official." "I like official," Caleb said solemnly, making everyone laugh with delight. That night, in their new home overlooking the glittering city, Nora tucked each child into their own bedreel beds, with matching furniture and windows that looked out over lights that stretched to the horizon. She sang them the same lullabies she'd always sung, but tonight they sounded like celebration instead of comfort. When she finally joined Ethan in their bedroom, he was standing by the window with a strange, wonderful expression on his face. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "That night in the storm," he said quietly. "If someone had told me then that losing control of my car would lead to this, to you, to our children, to the happiest I've ever been in my life, I never would have believed it possible." "Maybe that's how miracles work," Nora said, turning in his arms. "They disguise themselves as disasters until we're brave enough to see the blessing hiding inside." Ethan kissed her then, soft and deep and full of the passion that had been building between them for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I have something wonderful to tell you," Nora said, her voice trembling with excitement and nervous anticipation. "What is it, my love?" She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach, watching his face as understanding dawned like sunrise. "We're going to have a baby, Ethan. Our baby." The joy that transformed his expression was like watching the sun rise over paradise. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around their bedroom while she laughed with pure happiness. "A baby," he repeated, wonderingly. "Our son or daughter. Are you happy?" she asked. though his face already gave her the answer. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, Ethan said, setting her down gently and placing both hands protectively on her stomach. Little brother or sister for Joy, Grace, and Caleb. A baby who will grow up knowing nothing but love and security and family. A baby who will have the most amazing father in the world, Nora added. Tears of joy streaming down her face. Later, as they lay in each other's arms, Ethan traced gentle patterns on Nora's skin and marveled at the incredible journey that had brought them here from a car crash in a storm to a penthouse filled with love, from strangers to soulmates, from broken to beautifully, completely whole. Do you think they'll be happy? Nora asked sleepily. Joy, Grace, and Caleb. About the baby? They'll be absolutely thrilled, Ethan assured her. Joy will want to teach the baby to read before they can walk. Grace will sing to them constantly, and Caleb will probably compose original lullabies. What do you think we should name them? Nora asked. If it's a boy, Ethan said thoughtfully, maybe Charles, after my father, so he'll have a chance to be the grandfather he never got to be. Charles Ethan Caldwell Jr., Nora said, testing the name. I love it. It sounds strong and important. And if it's a girl? Hope, Nora said without hesitation. Hope, Louise. Because that's what brought us together, Hope. Amazing hope that saved us both and gave us this beautiful life. Ethan pulled her closer, his hand resting protectively over their growing child. Hope Louise Caldwell. Absolutely perfect. As Nora drifted off to sleep in her husband's loving arms, she thought about the little girl who'd once walked through storms with nothing but faith to guide her way. That girl had become a woman who'd saved a stranger's life, sacrificed everything for children who weren't her own, and found love beyond her wildest dreams. Tomorrow, she would wake up as Mrs. Nora Caldwell in a penthouse overlooking the city, with 3 beautiful children and another precious life growing inside her. She would wake up to a life where love had truly conquered all, where the impossible had become inevitable, where a poor girl's dreams had become a rich woman's blessed reality. But tonight, she was simply a woman deeply in love, holding tight to the miracle that had begun with a storm 9 months ago and would last a lifetime. Outside their windows, the city slept peacefully. Inside their home, 5 hearts beat in perfect harmony, proof that some love stories are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth believing in, against all odds. The storm had passed. The rainbow had come.